My father died about 5 years ago unexpectedly from a heart attack. To say it was hard on my mother and I was an understatement. Our old house in Knoxville just didn't feel like home anymore. About a year later, my mom and I made plans to take ourselves and our dog Ace on a move further south to a small town situated about half an hour from Atlanta. Just a few days before we were slated to move, I had one of the most vivid dreams I have ever come to experience. All that was within my dream was my bedroom, a picture-perfect recreation of the real thing. I sometimes wonder if I was in some sort of sleep paralysis state when it occurred. To further add to the dream's realism, in the middle of the night, the streetlights right across the street would illuminate through my window, creating a light reflection on the wall perpendicular. In my dream, as I lay there staring at the exact reflection on the wall, I saw an orb of smoke fade in from the shadows. Goosebumps chilled across my skin as I lay there panicked and afraid to move a muscle. Suddenly it stopped moving and steadily hung in the light's reflection as if it was staring at me. Without warning, it spoke to me in my dead father's voice. "I'm sending something to watch you." Despite hearing my father's voice come from the orb, I was terrified of it. I didn't know why, and yet I managed to squeak out a small reply towards it. "What?" I whispered. The orb remained silent for a few moments, leaving an eerily dead silence in the voice's place. Just as quickly, it spoke to me one final time. "Damn black." I woke up almost instantaneously, gasping for breath. The nightmare had chilled me to my core. I didn't know exactly what to make of it, especially those two final words. I chalked it up to maybe my dad wishing us well on our move, but at that time, I couldn't shake the feeling it was some kind of warning. Within the next couple of weeks, my mother and I moved out of Knoxville and headed south to Georgia. She had managed to find a quiet little house for us, with only 1 or 2 neighbors down a gravel road in the middle of the woods. It was a nice fit for us. Probably the best reliever of all the stress that came with the move, however, was our new neighbor's cat. She was a petite, older black cat that gravitated towards me almost instantly, and I treated her as if she was my own pet. I left out a can of food once or twice a week for her, and even if I didn't call out for her, when she saw me outside, she would always run up to me. She honestly helped ease my attention about leaving Knoxville behind, especially without Dad there with us. Less than a month into our new house, I awoke suddenly to a faint coughing noise that sounded like it was coming from downstairs. One important thing to know about our dog Ace is that he has a collapsed trachea. He needs medicine to help calm the condition down, so I'm used to waking up in the middle of the night to give him his medicine. I proceeded downstairs from my bedroom to give him his cough medicine, but I couldn't find him anywhere throughout the house. He wasn't in his bed sleeping. He wasn't in the kitchen. He was nowhere to be found. I didn't check Mom's bedroom, however, as to avoid to waking her up. Besides, I wouldn't have heard the coughing if he had been in there anyway, so I just let it be. That's when I heard the coughing again. But it was coming from further away now, as if it was from outside. I looked over at the side patio door leading onto the woodlands and realized I had forgotten to shut it, and there it stood, slightly ajar. Shit, I thought to myself, he got out. I immediately ran outside with a flashlight and started calling out for my dog. "Ace!" I shouted into the neighboring trees. I heard another cough and shined my light in its direction. That time, it had echoed from down the gravel road. I swear, a path had never looked so terrifyingly desolate before in my life than that night, as I stared down the same gravel road that led us to our new home. But in that moment, I thought my dog was lost, and I chalked it up to the new house jitters, so I pressed onward. "Ace, come on boy, home's this way, buddy." That's when I heard it, the cough that I had been following, almost right beside me. I shined my light towards the new sound. There stood a bright red fox in the middle of the path. For a moment, I figured it was some kind of sick fox I had mistaken for my dog. The whole time, as I was processing what I was seeing, it stared directly at me. Its eyes glowed from the light of my flashlight. However, our stare broke when it tilted its head to the right. I looked down, and there she was, our neighbor's little black cat standing beside me. However, it was as if she had a completely changed persona. She was no longer the happy, affectionate cat I had come to know. Instead, she had her back arched upright, every fiber of her hair standing at attention, and uttered the lowest growl I had ever come to hear out of a feline. In that moment, I figured she was just scared of the fox, so I knelt down beside her in a bid to coax her away and avoid the fox hurting her. But no matter how many times I tried to coax her out of fight mode, she wouldn't budge. Her stare remained unfazed. That's when I looked towards the direction of the fox once more, but there wasn't a fox standing there anymore. Instead, in the exact same spot of that gravel road, was a walking, rotting corpse of a roadkill coyote slowly moving towards me. I took a step back, absolutely horrified of what I was seeing. Its jaw was hanging loose from its face. One of its eyes was stained with blood, and it wobbled back and forth, as if it was desperately fighting pain. I rubbed my eyes out of disbelief, hoping I was imagining it, but it was still there when I reopened my eyes. Despite the gruesome sight before us, our neighbor's black cat, no matter how tiny she was, stood there and kept growling at the creature. Suddenly it stopped. The creature had ceased its walk towards us. For a moment, it just stood there, glancing back and forth between myself and this little black cat that was trying to defend me. That's when I unmistakably heard the beast mutter two solemn words in a low, gravelly voice. "Damn black." In a flash, the creature ran straight into the woods. I shined my flashlight in its direction, but it had completely vanished. Even the brush it had run through looked untouched. That's when the cat, still standing beside me, calmed herself down, almost as if nothing had happened. She rubbed herself up against my leg, returning to her normal, loving mood. Despite technically not being mine, I proceeded to scoop her up and run back into the house, before heading upstairs with the little black cat snuggled up in my arms. I decided to poke my head into my mother's room. Laying on the floor, sound asleep, was Ace. He had been there the entire time. I quietly closed her door before bolting upstairs. I made sure that little cat slept with me in my bed that night. From the research I've done, I think I was almost the victim of some kind of Skinwalker. It must have picked up the sounds my dog makes sometimes late at night, knowing I'd likely come to his aid. For whatever reason, our neighbor's black cat had scared it so badly, it scrambled away. I haven't seen it since that night, maybe because the same cat still likes to wander down the gravel road late at night, or maybe that thing just decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Either way, whether I have my father or pure luck to thank, I leave a can of food out every single night for that little black cat. A few years ago, about a year after my dad got a big promotion from work, my family moved to the suburbs in a much nicer area of town than we had been living in before. We were all extremely happy with the move, and our quality of life went way up. I was 15 back then, and eager to make some money for myself. I was getting my driver's license soon, and if I was going to enjoy my freedom to the fullest, I of course was going to need some money. So I set about sweet-talking all of the neighboring families, mentioning all of the babysitting I had done in my old neighborhood. I had never done any babysitting before, but I figured they didn't have to know that. Before long, my Friday and Saturday nights were booked solid with babysitting jobs that brought in a ton of money for very little work. I typically only had to take care of 1 or 2 kids for a couple of hours before putting them to bed, and I quickly became comfortable with my duties. Most of the jobs were boring, but the Miller kids were always a chore to take care of. The Millers lived in a house directly beside us, and they had identical twin boys that were both nightmares to keep watch of. Their names were Jack and Michael. Jack was a quiet boy, and he was always my favorite between the pair. Michael, on the other hand, was hyperactive and constantly loud. He liked to boss Jack around, and on more than one occasion, I would leave to get a snack ready for the boys or use the bathroom only to come back to Michael trying to beat Jack senseless. I wouldn't really have thought anything of it, boys will be boys, but there was just something about the way that Jack interacted with Michael that was putting me off. He would cower from him sometimes and shut his eyes. When he did this, Michael would lean down and whisper in his ear. I could never make out what Michael was saying, and the one time I tried to listen in, Michael snapped his head up and stared at me, clearly angry that I was trying to listen. He's just a 5-year-old boy, but something about it gave me the creeps. Jack will talk to him though, and sometimes they seem to get along very well. Always at the end of the night, Jack would beg me not to tell his parents about anything bad that Michael did. A few times I told him that I had enough, and I was telling them anyways, but the look of fear in his eyes after I said it always kept me from it. At the end of the night, his parents would go up to the room that the boys shared, check on them, then come back down to pay me, then I would leave. I did this probably 12 times for the Millers. A year ago, after a particularly bad night of Michael behaving horribly and tormenting Jack, I decided it was finally time to tell his parents about it. I put the boys to bed and decided not to mention my plans to Jack. When the boys' parents came home, I told them right away. The look on their faces when I mentioned Michael's behavior made me instantly regret mentioning anything. They paid me without saying a word, and Mr. Miller asked me to leave. He said that they appreciated all the times that I had babysat for them, but not to expect any more calls from them. I walked out of the house stunned. I had no idea what would make them act like that. The next weekend, I was at another neighbor's house, the Howards, and asked them if there was any reason that trying to talk to the Millers about Michael would bother them. I sat horrified as Miss Howard told me the story of how, 3 years ago, Michael had gotten hit and killed by a car after running into the road right by their house. I don't know how to explain what I saw so many times at the Millers, but needless to say, I quit my babysitting job after that. So, this happened about 12 years ago when I was 13. I was living in Texas at the time in a pretty crappy neighborhood. Lots of druggies. People constantly catcalling you from their cars or houses, that sort of thing. Of course I hated living there, but I learned to mostly tune everything out. So one day, a friend of mine had come over to hang out. It was summertime and we were out of school, so we had nothing to do. Despite the neighborhood being so sketchy, my friends and I would often walk around the streets during the day because there was nothing remotely interesting going on at my house. So we decided to walk down to the gas station about half a mile away to get some soda. On the way, there's a point where the house is on one side of the street stop, and instead there's a bit of woods that stretch way back. As we were passing by the trees, I happened to look inside, and I almost jumped out of my skin. Inside the tree line, there was a man standing completely still, just looking at us. He was wearing big dark sunglasses and a baseball cap, so I couldn't actually see his eyes, but he was looking in our direction. My heart skipped a beat and started pounding, and I quickly looked away. I quietly told my friend that there was a man watching us, and she glanced over and saw him too. However, she didn't seem scared or weirded out, probably because it was broad daylight and there were two of us. It definitely creeped me out though. So we kept walking, and I checked behind me to see if he was following us, but he hadn't come out of the trees, and I couldn't see him. A few minutes later, we made it to the store and got our sodas and headed back to my house. There was only one way to get there, so we had to pass by the woods again. I wasn't too keen on that, but I figured the man had left or moved on by that point. Oh, how I was dead wrong. As we walked past the same spot we had seen him earlier, he suddenly darted out of the trees and started to walk behind us. I really don't know if my friend was just trying to act brave, or if she simply had no sense of self-preservation, but she just kept walking calmly. I thought at first she hadn't seen him, but she had gone completely silent, which was unusual for her, and she refused to look anywhere but straight ahead. I picked up the pace a bit, and she followed suit. I didn't dare to look behind us, but I could clearly hear his footsteps not far back. He seemed to walk faster too, as we sped up. I would have started running if my friend hadn't seemed so calm about everything. I didn't really want to look crazy or like I was overreacting. As we got closer to my house, I no longer heard his footsteps, and I finally got up the nerve to look behind us. He was nowhere to be seen. I was relieved, but confused. It was a wide straight road, and I couldn't see anywhere he might have ducked into to disappear so quickly, but I wasn't about to go looking for him. To this day, I still don't know what he was doing, randomly standing in the trees. Thankfully, I never saw him again. I live in a studio apartment in a building that was built in the 1840s. It's been an apartment building all of its life, but it was built as a luxury apartment building for the very wealthy, which means my apartment, while having many original features, was once part of a much larger apartment. I can only guess, having never seen the original plan, but I think that it is very likely that the entire wing in which my apartment building is in one apartment. This means that the layout can be a little weird. Specifically in my case, it means that there is a door that is technically usable, but not in use by my bed. It's a second exit for emergency purposes, and it cannot be opened from the outside, though it doesn't have the best lock. It's right by my head, and I have pieces of furniture blocking it. Since the events I am about to describe transpired, I've installed 2 chains. From the outside, it's just an unmarked door in the middle of a hallway. Further down the hallway is my neighbor's door. That's all there is down the hallway, 2 doors. No one but my neighbor and any guests he might have should go by the door. And yet, people keep trying to open the door, not knocking, just trying vigorously to open it. It happens every few months at different times of the day. Usually the person or people would shake the doorknob very hard for like 15 seconds. There is no way they confused it for my neighbor's apartment, as that door is marked and visible from where they are standing. Plus, after they try the door, the footsteps leave the hallway rapidly. There is no reason why someone would go to that door by mistake, as it is between 2 apartment numbers. Maintenance and management know what's behind the door, so it makes no sense why someone would want to open it. Once could be chalked up to a highly improbable mistake, but it keeps happening. From the inside part of the door, there is a peephole, but it's mostly covered with paint. There is a sliver that is uncovered, but it's hard to see out of. My boyfriend once knocked on the door to get my attention because it was very early and he found something important that I had left, and again, the door is right by my head, and that's when he told me that I should come see something. I guess the previous tenant had put up a piece of duct tape over the peephole and it had been peeled off by someone, and the peephole actually looked in, not out, and despite it being mostly covered, from the outside you could watch me sleep. So now the peephole is covered from the inside. I'm not very afraid, as I've taken precautions to ensure they can't get in, but it is odd that someone, or multiple people, keep trying to get into my apartment. So this happened over the course of a couple of months early last year. I happened to live next to a woman who took care of around 10 to 11 mentally ill people. I'm not sure how that works so she could do that, but she did. Anyways, that ended up being a terrible mistake moving there on my part, despite the realtor warning me beforehand. I started noticing things like the mentally ill neighbors staring at me, saying gibberish. I just attributed these behaviors to them being mentally ill, naturally, but the occurrences begun to happen inside of my own home in chilling ways. I began to experience a feeling of not being alone in my house. It was more than that creepy feeling most people get. Soon after, I started to see things moved a little bit, like someone was going through my fridge, or my mail, or my closet, and then in my room. That's when I started to really worry. Here's where it all went to shit. I'm getting ready to go out to lunch with a couple of my friends. It's probably 11 a.m. or so. I'm doing my hair in the bathroom, and that's when I hear something. Suddenly I stop. I stood there silently, and I hear someone breathing shallowly on the other side of the shower curtain. I completely lost it. I quietly ran out the room and called the police. I live alone. There should be no one inside of my house but me. The police arrive and tell me to stay outside with another cop car, and they find one of the mentally ill neighbors in my downstairs shower with a butter knife from my kitchen. Apparently there was a hole he got in through the side of my house into my garage. What's funny is the realtor didn't even know about it, and this let him into my house possibly daily for months. This hole was well hidden, so we wouldn't have known, but he somehow did. Naturally, I was pretty traumatized, but despite that, they arrested him and he was institutionalized. The woman who takes care of them apologized tirelessly, but I moved out. I moved out that quick. Ever since these events, I'm terrified of being alone in my house. Luckily, I have a girlfriend now, and she lives here in my house with me. But damn, that event shook me up. One night, 2 of my sisters and I were home alone. I was 8 years old, and my oldest sister was 18. My parents had left her to watch me and my other sister while they went out. Now for a little background. We shared a driveway with our neighbors, and it was pretty narrow. They were an older couple that rode motorcycles, and they were very cool people. Well, as my parents were waiting to pull out of the driveway, they see the headlights of 2 motorcycles coming at 10 miles per hour, so they assumed it was our neighbors and pulled out onto the road, so the motorcycles had room to pull in. Well, it wasn't my neighbors. It was these 2 middle-aged men who then pulled up beside my parents' car and start yelling at them while still driving down our road. My dad pulled over to apologize for pulling out in front of them, but the men were irate and threatening him, so he drove away. The men followed for a few miles and then pulled off onto another street, so my parents figured it was the end of it. Oh, how it wasn't. I was in the basement playing Super Mario Bros. 3 when I hear this banging on the door. My sister came running downstairs saying these men were at the door screaming and trying to break it down. We all hid in my dad's basement workshop, terrified as could be. I don't know the order in which my sister called, but she called 911 and my parents. My parents, who fortunately had recently gotten a cell phone, as this was a time when they were fairly new, were able to immediately turn around and come home. Because we lived out in the middle of a farm country, it took the police about 30 minutes to arrive. My parents arrived before the police got there, but the men had already left. Before leaving, the men threw our trash bin out into the driveway. Compared to what they could have done had they gotten into the house, that was pretty light. I still look back and wonder what would have happened had they gotten in. Would they have beaten us, raped us, murdered us, or just trashed the house while we cowered downstairs? I really do think it's best not to know.